Hello guys! A lot of you had questions after the last car rigging tutorial where I used modular rigging in Unreal Engine. And honestly, some of them hit on things I wish I would cover the first time. In this Q&A video, I'm going to show you how to make your rig cleaner, faster and way more efficient, including a better way to handle wheel rotation, control limits, and even how to save time by reusing what you've already built. These are the kinds of fixes that can seriously transform your workflow. So let's dive right in. Let's start with the easiest question, and that is the visibility of your control curves. Sometimes they're within the geometry and you can't see them. Like I do have a front wheel control, but that's well inside this front left tire. The video that I produced a while back and explained the step-by-step of creating this modular rig, I changed the shading model from lit to viewport in order to access this little guy. Well, I received a couple of questions that what if we don't want to switch to wireframe? Is there any easier way to see these controls at all times without switching the shading model back and forth? Yes, there is actually a way to do that without going into wireframe, and that is through view options by changing the overlay of your controls. So if I click away where we still can't see the control, all I need to do is to go to view options, which is this sandwich drop down here, and I go show controls as overlay. And regardless of the position of the control, you're still able to see the control. Yeah, so I can go in there and select the control via the module hierarchy while I'm looking at it and say, all right, I want this to have a radius of 14. So that's a very easy fix to change and improve the visibility of your controls if that's what you want to do. There is another question from one of the subscribers asking why I can't see sockets and controls in my rig hierarchy. So I simulated that issue. I mean, it's really not an issue, but the fact that you can't really see your sockets and your proper hierarchy with all of your controls can actually be an issue. If you run into this, the easy fix I found is to either recreate your parents, relink your parents, or there are nodes in your module hierarchy with no parents, and as soon as you assign that, everything will reappear. So you can see I have wheels, and within wheels I have actually a parent, nominated a parent. That's why they're not showing up. But this suspension here doesn't really have a parent. So if I go in here, the parent control is not there. And you may say, well, that's even worse because you cannot actually link it manually. Well, what you can do is to click on the parent and everything will show up here for sure. And all you need to do is to connect them to the right parent. So for example, if I were to connect all my suspensions into the root, as soon as you make that connection, the whole list appears. To a trickier scenario where you still have this problem and this time everything is connected. Well, in that case, it's just a matter of refreshing one of these nodes and everything will appear. Same trick still applies. For example, I'm using this suspension front left as an example. All you need to do is just to click on this arrow to reset, and you go ahead and reparent. I can go in there for front left, drag and drop into front left, and everything appears. Now, the big question is, why is this happening? The reason behind all of this and all those sort of cheap tricks is because you haven't compiled everything yet. So sometimes you even do these tricks and you don't get the result. The reason is, as you can see, I've got quote-unquote dirty compile, meaning that you haven't compiled all of your nodes and connections, and Unreal Engine is unable to evaluate and calculate all of those sockets and the position of them and the connection between them. So most of the time, all you need to do is to actually press compile. And you can see I'm getting a green tick here and everything shows up just fine. So keep that in mind. It's good to know some cheap tricks, but at the same time, it's more important to know the reasoning behind these type of issues. Now, another great question that I received from one of the subscribers on my Patreon page was how to set min and max for some of these controls. Well, some controls like the tire is only responsible for rotation, and we have no issues with that. But in case you noticed, this suspension control needs to have a min and max. At the moment, it goes all the way up, even beyond the tire region, and to make the matter worse, it doesn't even come down. It's because of the default min and max setup that Unreal puts in place for some of these controls. You may use them, the default value might work, but sometimes you have to go and tweak them. Now, although I said never select these controls, at some point it is actually good to go into their attributes and properties to observe what's happening. So you can see, as for the suspension back left, the one that I have specified, if I start moving it up, you can see this current value changes. The initial, the rest position is also set to 0, but the minimum is set to 0 as well. That's why you cannot push this in negative Y. And the max is set to 100. This means that I can push this up all the way to a value of 100 and only then it stops. So we need to change that. Let's see what value works for us. So perhaps 5 should do the trick, and -5 for minimum would be good values. Now we understand what's going on. We can go to module hierarchy, select our module, and in here I can scroll down under default rollout and I have access to min and max. So as agreed, -5 for minimum and 5 for maximum. I'm going to compile and save, and now if I select my control, I only have a limited access min and max to play around with. If I go back, you can see min is set to -5 and max set to 5. Current is set to -5, what we are seeing right now, and the resting position is set to 0. That's exactly how it should be. I'm going to set the current to 0 as well to bring everything back to the position. I honestly think that was a perfect question. One great thing that I will add, no one asked that, but in case if you want this tire to also move with this suspension, so right now I'm only moving the suspension, you need to have an extra bone in here. Unfortunately, this rig hierarchy doesn't have like a body bone, but if you ever have an extra bone and from there you branch out, you can easily add a control to that bone and parent both wheel and suspension to that bone. In that case, when you set up controls for your suspension, when you move it, you move both body and the tire. I mean, I thought it would be useful in case if you are wondering. Another question that I received was about speeding up the workflow. Is there any way to duplicate these controls as opposed to recreating them from scratch, setting up the radius or primary axis from scratch? Is there any way to just duplicate them and use one control for all remaining 3 wheels? The answer is yes, but you still need to make few adjustments in their location and the position of the control. So let's put that into an example. I intentionally deleted the front right wheel and front right suspension, so we have nothing on the other side, and we want to just duplicate what we have and move it to the other side to gain speed, save a minute or 2, let's say. All I need to do is just to go to FL for the wheel and FL for the suspension and right click on them and go to mirror. That's where proper naming convention comes to rescue, because all the left hand side assets are named _L, and for the right hand side we've included _R. So I'm searching for _L and I'm replacing it with _R. Definitely pay a visit to axis to flip. In my case is positive X, so that is correct, and mirror axis to X, which is actually correct. So I'm going to go OK, and it's going to create both controls for us. You can see the child is always left behind, so you kind of need to do a little bit of manual work, moving suspension FR to wheel FR, which is fine. They are connected to the right bones, which is nice. All you need to do is just to select this guy and go ahead and readjust the position of this control. In this case, I put something like -20 and -10 and fix the rotation, and in no time I bring the control back to the position. That's another way of creating controls. If you don't want to select the control every single time, fix its axis and its radius, or perhaps changing its shape every single time, Mirror tool should be help you with that. Now the question you all been perhaps waiting for, and that is how to move these wheels with the global control when you move the vehicle. So this is something that I kind of didn't cover in my previous tutorial on control rig, and I received plenty of questions on social media. Perhaps the most asked question was this one. So let's jump back to Unreal Engine and see how we can make that happen using a very easy to follow and simple hack. All right, here I am inside the editor. Let's have a look. I'm going to select the global, so wheels are not spinning. That's where we kind of ended in our tutorial as well. Now, the property responsible for this movement or type of behavior is called direction axis, and that's what we need to target. There are two ways of doing that. The first way is to actually start fresh using Blueprint and define all of our movements using forward solve and apply that to our control so everything behaves correctly. That's a more technically correct way of doing this, but what I'm about to show you is a very easy to use hack that you can use in order to fix everything without breaking anything. So let's have a look at the direction that we're aiming. The direction we're aiming is X, and the default value for direction axis is usually Y. So if your vehicle is actually facing in Y direction, you're one click ahead. But for me, because it's set to Y, I need to switch to X so I get the right movement with my X axis. So where to find it? You need to select your module, go into details, and usually that property is right at the bottom. Direction axis set to Y. And we need to switch that to X for all four. So let's do that really quick. and front right set to X. Compile, and technically everything should go according to the plan, right? Yes, everything is spinning, but in an opposite direction. So it seems like even direction axis couldn't really fix this issue. And what makes it even stranger is if I target, let's say, front left, there is an invert value here, which I can enable, and you would think that could fix the issue, but no. That invert, for whatever reason, is not going to fix the problem. So what we should do? Well, the hack that I was talking about is to actually target the internal structure of our module asset, because anything that you want to create in the blueprint is already there in this particular module asset. We just need to find it, tweak it, and reapply it to our structure. So let's start. The first step is to actually make sure your engine content is enabled, because in order to find the original location for these assets, you need to tap into your engine content. Next is to go to your engine, go to your plugin, and look for a folder. I actually colored it so I can find it easier, called Control Rig Modules Content. And there's only one folder in there. If I go inside it, you can see all of these original module assets can be found here. The one that we're looking for is wheel. But you know what? I don't want to really have any permanent changes to this module asset, because you never know when you're going to use this differently. So what I'm going to do is to press Control D and duplicate that. And I'm going to call that wheel X, because we want to sort of use that in X axis. Now I've already created a folder in my content drawer. So if I go into content, vehicle, I have a folder called module. So we're going to sort of move that duplicated module asset in there to make sure that the original state of our module assets are actually intact. So I'm going to go to engine again. I'm going to find this folder. I'm going to locate wheel X, and with that selected, I'm going to go back and move that asset into our module folder. Remember not to copy. You don't want to leave any residue behind. You always want to be organized. There is a very specific reason that we are tapping into the internal structure of this module asset, and you don't want to dilute that with all the original ones. So I'm going to go move, and if I look closely in here, I can perhaps make it slightly bigger for you guys to see. Wheel X is now showing up in our module asset library. I'm going to double click on wheel X, and we get to the internal structure. Everything is ready to go for us, including the forwards solve and backwards solve. Now what we want to target is actually forward solve. So I'm going to double click to get into its rig blueprint. And you can see all the bits and pieces that we need to do in order to fix the issue is already there. What we want to target is compute rotation axis, and more specifically, get direction axis. That is responsible for fixing our problems. And if you remember, we were going in the negative direction for our rotation axis. So all we need to do is to flip the value before they go into rotate vector. So there is a node called negate, and this negate is responsible for multiplying the input by -1, essentially flipping the number, which is going to do the trick for us. So from result to value, and from result to the vector input. That is all you need. I'm going to go compile. I'm going to save, and believe it or not, that's all you needed to change for this module asset. Now, in order to work non-destructively, I'm going to unparent all the suspensions from the list, because as soon as you hit delete on the wheels, it is actually going to delete the suspensions, and these are all healthy, correctly set up and ready to go. So I'm going to select all of these four and delete them because they belong to the wheel, the original wheel module asset. We want to use wheel X module asset instead. So I'm going to speed up the video. I'm going to create these wheel module assets. I'm going to reparent suspension to them and parent the wheel into the global control, and we will see the result after that. Now it's all done. Just to recap, we need to change the axis of the control, resize its radius, and set the direction axis to X, knowing that we now have a flipping value in our internal rig. Let's see the result. If I select the global and try to move it, everything works just fine. How cool is that? That should do the trick. I hope you found this quick Q&A useful and use these tips in your projects to make better rigs and speed up your workflow. Thank you again for your support. You can know more about upcoming projects via my Patreon, Reddit, and Instagram page. I hope you found it useful. Until the next video, see you guys later.